I'm back again, but this time talking about a different topic, and it's not in Polish. Now, what we're going to do is, the next hour or so, we're going to get a little bit technical, but don't worry, we're going to do it in a very interesting way, and let me explain why. So, as I touched on earlier on, I'm very lucky to meet a lot of brands, work with a lot of brands, and work with a lot of retailers. And one of the things that happens is people really don't understand first-party data. And when I was talking to the organizers, I said, why don't we do a couple of minutes where we just take it really basic and build it up. And then we have Shiva on from Microsoft, where he's really going to bring this to life. So I started off today by saying, retailers have the most valuable asset, intention-based consumer behavior data, first-party data. And this is, to me, what's going to change business models. I'm actually going to say to you that I think this is really worthwhile thinking through in a lot more detail. And this is what I'm hopefully going to explain to you why. So I showed you this earlier. On-site, off-site, in-store. Great. Targeting and insights. And at the bottom, I put the word first-party data. This is really at the core because of this. Are you confused when you hear people talk about analytics, insights, data, attribution, data-driven, ROI, measurement? Yeah? Because when people say the word data, they can mean any of these things. Yeah? How do I know? Because I was just listening to the to Robert there, talking about dealing with a particular supplier in I think it was in Holland. Well, I know this particular supplier. This particular supplier came to me, or sorry, retailer, I should say not supplier, retailer came to me and said, how do we monetize our data? And when I hear the word monetize our data, that telegraphs me that they don't really understand what they're talking about. Because every one of these things here can constitute data. Because data can be analytics, data can be using attribution, data can be incrementality, and so on. So when you're working in your company, what you need to look out for is when somebody says the word data, you have to say, what do you mean? Because when I went and worked with this company afterwards, I said, you really don't mean monetization of your data. They didn't mean that at all. What they meant was, how do we create audiences that we can do targeting and insights against? They called it data. We're just going to deconstruct that over the next few minutes. It'll be hopefully really handy whether you're a retailer, an agency, or a brand. So, let's start with the basics. What's first-party data? Guess what? It's the information a retailer or a brand collects directly from its own audiences and its own customers through its own channels. Yeah. We have data, we bring it in, we got it broken down into 3 different types. We've got transaction data, shoppers' purchasing history, we got customer data, and we got loyalty data. Now, I heard Robert mention that he was very concerned about the use and abuse of data, and particularly customer data. And the thing about retail media is, almost all of this is anonymized, pseudonymized as it's called, so that they don't even know the individual. And we're going to see a demo of that later. But on top of that, the loyalty data, you know, I think I mentioned earlier on, I was with John Humby in Tesco last week, and they've got 26 million households in the UK. There are 29 million households in the whole of the UK, and they got 26 million of them. So they know more about the individual person in the UK than the UK census does, than the UK government does. They know everything. And their legal, and the legal framework they operate in is so stringent. I've got a couple of clients in Germany as well. The legal frameworks they're operating are so stringent, it actually causes challenges for the retail media network. So if anybody here is worried about the word overuse and abuse of data, I'm seeing the exact opposite. I'm seeing far more conservatism than is legally required. So just put that aside from what Robert said. So there's 3 different types of data. So when we talk about your data, and remember I said, when you're talking to your people in work, I want you to be specific with them. When they say data, I want to say, are you talking about transaction data that we pick up from our website or we pick up from our store? Or are we talking about stuff that tells us about the customer, their lifetime value, they do, what their preferences are? Or are we talking about the wider demographics kind of view? So let me try and explain this in my context. I go to my local supermarket. What will happen is they'll look at my basket and they'll go, this person comes in once a week, buys typically 20 items, blah, blah, blah. That's that. However, when you look at my data from the loyalty aspect, you'll see I buy a lot of gluten-free products because I am what's called a celiac. So I don't eat bread, I don't drink beer, I don't eat pizza, biscuits, donuts, nothing. Yeah? I have a specific type of thing, and that will come out in the data. And so therefore, when they send me promotions, it's tailored to my needs. And guess what? I'm happy with that. I'm very happy with that, because I don't want stuff that's not relevant. And thirdly, the demographics are, then they can just work out through my age, kind of through my rough local area as well, what sort of person I am, and they fill it in around that. Clear? Yeah? You need to ask that question. Second point is then what's called second-party data. It's where we share that with somebody else, be it a brand or somebody else. Now this is quite not that often because it's obviously there's a lot of legal ramifications on second-party data, and it's using what's called a clean room, and we are not going to get into that technical analysis of what a clean room is, but it's a way for us to share data that doesn't mean the actual data is shared. It's matched, but not shared. If anybody's familiar with Amazon, they have a tool called Amazon Marketing Cloud, and the Amazon Marketing Cloud enables this. You can bring your brand data in, you can bring it over here, and you can combine the two and do analysis of it. Okay, well, that's second-party data. Guess what's next? Third-party data. Yeah. So what is third-party data? It's data coming in, surprise, surprise, from a third party. It's general across the market. So Circana, Nielsen, and then there's those who are actually scraping stuff from the internet, such as Edge or Profitero. So these are things that people have been buying inbound from other vendors for years and years and years. Everybody probably knows Nielsen. They've got 30,000 employees or something like that around the world. Circana used to be IRI. Similar organizations, lots of generic data where they pull in from retailers across the world. However, on this side here, the reason why this is new is obviously, as we touched on earlier, cookies changing, GDPR requirements changing, a whole set of things changing. This data from the retailers is now a lot more specific, a lot more interesting, and it's cleaner, and it doesn't have any issues around privacy, and very few issues, no issues around ads appearing in the wrong location. So this is generic and unspecific. This is specific and detailed. Now, you might go and say, Colin, isn't this obvious? Well, the amount of time I've got to try and explain to people the difference between first-party data and third-party data is a lot. So you can see immediately that this is cool, and I can use this, but this is very interesting from both the brand and the retailer perspective. So how interesting? Well, let's look at that. So if I'm the retailer, and I've got this stuff, all this data, can I use it? So the very first thing the retailers are doing is use case number one, what's called audience building, and then taking those audiences and activation. Now, that's just basically taking that box of data that I have, the consumer, the loyalty data and so on, and I create this rich segments, segment A, segment B. It creates great targeting, and I can use our ads on the website or across the internet to target them. Now, this audience is a smart, familiar audience, otherwise you wouldn't be at a retail media conference. I can tell you, the majority of your colleagues don't understand that. They don't really get what that really means and the ramifications of it. So the first use case, the retailers are taking this data, using it for audience building and using it for activation. How do they do that? They take these first-party audiences and they enable on-site to do what's called sponsored display, sponsored product, to do keyword and contextual ads. Cool. But off-site, that's when you can use those audiences to target people on social media. Off-site display, connected TV, digital out-of-home, email, and then in-store. Now this is the visual you should use if you're trying to explain to people what are audiences, what's first-party data for, in terms of creating, targeting, and insights. Now this is, when it's put up like this, it's quite a simple visual. But the reason I keep hammering this home for you is that this is a kind of an abstract idea. It's like the word data, it's just an idea. I can't touch it, I can't feel it, I can't put it on the table. So when you are talking to people, you need to use very specific language that is really clear and this sort of really simple visual. There's a reason why when I do all my keynotes, I literally say at the start, I go, I know you're all experts, but let's tell you what I'm talking about. On-site, off-site, in-store, targeting and insights, so on. And the reason for that is I want to make sure everybody's on the same playing field before we get into it. And you should do the same when you're talking about retail media in your store, if you're a retailer or if you're a brand. And I'll go back to what I said 5 minutes ago. I was approached in the last 4 weeks by a major retailer, turns over 9 figures, and they said, how do we monetize our data? And I had to explain all this to them. And the person was the head of data. Yeah, they weren't some random person in the company. Yeah, they couldn't articulate it as simply as that. So, use case 1, audience building, activation. Cool? Clear? Use case 2, measurement. Don't worry, we'll be talking about measurement, and I think Agnieszka from OBI talked about measurement as well. So measurement, guess what? Measuring the impact of sales and metrics through retail media. That's what the data's for, and we demonstrate performance. Clear? The third use case, I should say, is then taking all that data and turning it into insights. Better understanding of the shopper, the category trends, and basically building true shopper-driven insights. Now, what was very interesting when Nicole from Barilla was talking earlier on, you heard what she said. She said, we are very interested in insights. That's the starting point for what we do. And I've done a bit of work with Barilla in the past, and it really is true. It's like they are very interested in capturing the insights through the data. Now, here's an example of one well-known company. It's quite detailed, so you may want to take a picture, but I'm showing it to you to show you how you can parse those insights. So I can have insights from my first-party data that are sales, media, supply chain, or shopper insights. Sales, media, supply chain, and shopper insights. Now this is important because if I'm working on the marketing side, I may be more interested in seeing whether my media worked. If I'm working in sales or if I'm working in commercial, I may be more interested in did it get results. If I'm working in supply chain, I may be here. And if I'm maybe just interested in shopper and insights, that could be marketing, that could be sales, that could be anybody. But let's look at some of the things here. That's data by brand, attribution data, impressions. So why do we want to do it? We have better outcomes across each step. Now, this is probably my most important visual today because what I find is people use the word data or insights as badly as they use the word data because they're unspecific about what they want with those insights. So what I would say, again, for clarity of language, is that you make sure that when you are talking about insights, you say, I'm talking about insights to help us drive revenue. I'm talking about insights to help us optimize our media. I'm talking about insights to help us improve our supply chain, our inventory levels. I'll tell you a story. I was working with a very famous company, snacks, and I had to do this interview process with them. And I interviewed them in London, Mexico, Dubai, and Melbourne, all online. And they were all supply chain people. I see myself as a retail media and a marketing guy. And so most of the time I was talking to them, I didn't really know tons about supply chain. And how they spoke about supply chain was just absolutely incredible. And they said very clearly, we really like and understand why retail media is interesting, because it can help us minimize out of stock, and it can help us reduce the working capital we have tied up in inventory. They all said that. So that was a very interesting insight that I was like, oh, talking just about ads here. No. He was like, we can literally fine tune it. And because it's such a big organization, 0.01 change in inventory levels and out of stock levels has a massive impact on their bottom line. This is a company who deliver things down to the minute by the truck, not by the pallet, into a store. Cool? Yeah? So let's summarize that. The value of insights is better execution of what you're currently doing, and then breakthroughs in a much wider context. Better doing our current stuff, optimization stuff, and better version of completely different perspectives on the world, breakthrough outcomes. So if you take the client I did the interviews with, yeah, they're like, yeah, cool, we slightly increased the basket size, we upsold, that was amazing, that's normal every day. However, what if we completely changed how we thought about inventory? Completely changed how we thought about shoppers, because now we see the data in front of us. Remember I talked about Kantar and Circana earlier? They're amazing, it's great stuff, yeah? But it doesn't give you this fine-grained things as to why, say, somebody like me buys a certain type of product in my local supermarkets. It's pretty obvious once you get into the data, but I would just have been a broad brush. Hey, gluten-free products are increasing. But there's a very specific reason for that. And they could increase their loyalty, they could increase their conversion just by recognizing that. Cool. We're going to get a little bit techie, and then we're going to shift into measurement. Is that okay? Cool? So one thing, back in the day, for my sins, I worked with a chief data scientist. And he used to use all this fancy language with me. And I was like, I don't understand a word of this. So what I did was I wrote all his material for him so I could understand it. And if I couldn't understand it, I'm telling you, many of these other people would be able to understand it as well. So when we talk about modeling, and we're going to see some great models in a minute, I want to talk to you about descriptive models and predictive models. There's actually 4 different types of models. And this is very important for you, particularly in a retail media network who wants to sell more and upsell more. But it's also very important from a marketer's perspective who says working with their agency. And the agency is telling them, I've got these models. Well, you need to be specific about what you're looking for to get better results. So a descriptive model and analytics is what happened. It's past. Cool, no problem. What happened last week? Great. A predictive is what could happen, what is likely to happen next. Yeah, not very difficult. However, the interesting stuff occurs in these prescriptive models. What should we do? And the propensity models, what's the likelihood of an outcome? Now, this is where the cool stuff comes in with retail media, and with insights, with analytics. This is where we're going to. For instance, do I do a buy one, get one free promotion on a particular brand to this particular shopper segment that is price sensitive? And do I not do that promotion to this other segment who is not price sensitive? So for years, I worked in the airline business, and we had to do all this sort of modeling through that because we had huge databases, 400,000 and 500,000 databases, and we would split them all up because our yield, the actual revenue per seat, was dependent on us getting this right. And the revenue on the bottom line at that scale is very important. So if you take, say, let's use an airline like Ryanair. They do 100 million passengers a year. If they get one bit of this right, the opportunity in terms of, say, 5 cent, 10 cent euro per seat has a phenomenal impact on the bottom line. If you think they can think through propensity models, a version of a prescriptive model, a predictive model that estimates the probability something's going to happen, well, then that's really powerful. Now, you might say, Colin, this is all very esoteric, all very kind of interesting. These are what very large-scale organizations are doing and applying them right across all their media channels. And this is super important because this cost of technology is going down. This is now much more available. When people talk about data science, this is the world they're talking about for the most part. It's not rocket science, but it requires a bit of understanding. So we're now on to the final two bits here. When people, you heard a lot of this word today. You heard data, you heard insights, then you heard measurement. Back to my original point that I said at the outset. The challenge of measurement is, what is it? When people say to retail media networks, your measurement sucks, I always push back. And I say, why? Here's why. Because different marketing goals require different metrics. Marketers don't use the same metrics in every category, and retailers, in many cases, don't have access to those metrics. So does Roger working in Diageo have exactly the same metrics requirement that, say, Barilla have? Do they have the same distribution channels? No, they don't. So to go and use broad brush statements like the measurement sucks is incorrect. This is why I say to the brands, you've got to be quite specific about your particular set of metrics and what you are particularly interested in. And I think even Nicole said it at the outset, he said, start with your objectives, because then you can solve the measurement issue. Now, one thing I will say is, it says retailers do not have access to metrics. I always say in this context, I think you need to give the retailers a break. Because the retailers have lots of these legacy systems where they've got point of sale data, online data, loyalty data, all this stuff sitting around, and it's really very hard to pull it all together. And so to have an expectation that everything is magic at a push of a button is not really a feasible option. Even the most sophisticated organizations do not have everything at their fingertips, and they have armies of people working on it. I think it's the same, I'm trying to remember a conversation I had with Walmart as well. Yeah, they have 200 people in from dunnhumby, just trying to get the data all together in one place to work. This is the richest, most successful, largest retailer ever in the world. So it's hard. It's really, really hard to pull them all together. So let's boil it down to what I think you as brands should have, and I think you as retailers should have. Very simple. I think you should have media metrics, sales metrics, and customer metrics. Break the world up down. Really simple. Don't get involved in any more detail simply because it's so early in the world of retail media. So if you are a brand and you're working with the retailer, you say, I just want to focus on media metrics, sales metrics, and customer metrics. That's how I think about the word. Let's start there and let's start filling in the gaps. Now, Jason is on slightly later from IAB, and I'm going to strongly recommend you look at what the IAB EU, when talking about this, because they have an incredible array of thinking through the metrics that matter. Media metrics, sales metrics, media insights, customer insights, brand insights, sales insights, and incrementality. And they go through those at a very nth degree detail. I've run some of these courses myself, and the people get a heck of a lot from them. So if you are going, okay, I get the idea, I understand it, I think I get this whole thing, but some of my team need to get into the detail, there's plenty of opportunity to have a look at this and so on. But I still think, boil it up like this, and then when you want to get into the detail, you get into it something like that and tease it out. Final point, well, 1.5 points I'm going to make. You will hear across every single panel in the world, retail media, this one word. This is the word. Is retail media incremental? Is this driving new sales? I think he picked up some really subtle points from Adam and from Roger and from Nicole earlier on. Now that is interesting, but it's not the only thing. However, you will find many people saying, this is the only thing. I only want new customers. Otherwise, why would I do this? I think that is the incorrect lens to look at retail media. I think it's an interesting thing to ask, but I think it's too hard. And I explain this in a very simple way. Like this. Anybody here ever done a television ad, done TV ads, bought television ads, radio ads, print ads, yeah? Yeah, a few of you have, yeah? So I can guarantee one thing never happened. Never ever happened. Never did you walk in the door of the television station the next day after your ad appeared and said, how many extra sales did I get from my ad that appeared on the television last night? It literally never happened. I can see into your lives, and I know that never happened. So TV, radio, print, they don't have to prove anything. They're just like, you sort it out yourself. Retail media is slightly different because we're already funding it through other formats. So it's a fair question, but not a fair question at a certain level because you never ask incremental sales from other channels. And there's one other thing with your incrementality. What I would suggest you add, because you're a smart audience, you ask smart questions. And incrementality depends on the campaign, the creative, as Nicole talked about, the call to action, the spend, the share of voice, the media type, and the audience. So again, back to language, and what sort of language are you using when you're talking to your supplier partner? You need to be specific. Alone, and Nicole did call this out, alone, if you got the creative right, your incrementality would automatically be through the roof. Yeah. If you, looking at this from a sort of overview, how are you going to prove incrementality in store, online, and offsite? What if the weather was raining and it's a Thursday night and everybody says, I'm going to get a beer? What if it's sunny and the ice cream sales go through? Yeah, it's all a bit grey. So I think you should ask the question, but I think you've got to be smart when you're dealing with the retailer. I think the retailer has to be smart and say, you don't have access to all this information. Here's what I got, ROI, ROAS, incremental ROAS, and so on. So just be careful when you hear the words incrementality. What are you talking about? And I would rather you spend more time nailing the creative or nailing share of voice or nailing the call to action than just going on and on. Cool? Have you got a deal on incrementality? Finally, this is an example, this second last thing. This is one very well-known brand, and this is how they structure what they want from the retailers. So just giving you an actual case study, they want campaign metrics, they want optimization metrics, they want revenue metrics, and they want results metrics. This is how they break it up. I think it's a nice breakup. I kind of like it. You may not use that day one, but I think one of the clients I worked with and said, you know what, you may have campaign metrics that just ask for these. You may have optimization metrics that just add for that and that. And you may have revenue metrics that say, listen, I just want total volume sold, total revenues, and average order value. Cool. And wrap up, you ask for maybe a couple of these as well. The whole idea is, the partnership idea with the retailer is where you will get what you want, because the retailer would love to provide all this at the drop of a hat, click of a finger, but it's kind of hard. So that's why you got to work with them. And my final point is what I call the intelligence funnel. And it's just a way of you thinking about insights. I've written a little ebook on this, that's why I'm kind of pretty passionate about this idea. We, as people, talk about data in the abstract. Really what we want is insight and then actions. But overall, what I'd like you to do is think about, how do we use retail media to build a level of intelligence about our customer, a level of intelligence about our business, and a level of sort of like a capability that we can look at something and go, well, that's going to work, well, that's not going to work. That person's going to work, that campaign's not going to work, and so on. This is where you're getting to. We just use language like this. What we really mean is an overview around intelligence and making better fingertip decisions around what we need to do as a business. I have an ebook on this topic called Being Data Driven, The Metrics That Matter. If you are really struggling to sleep tonight, I can also recommend this particular book as well. But it gets into the detail of how you should think about brand, retail, media, and this idea of intelligence to make decisions. And I am on time. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully that was a good deconstruction for you.